The Wirecard Scandal. On the morning of June 18th, 2020, a 2-minute video appeared online. In it, a man in a black turtleneck stood before his own employees and admitted something almost unthinkable. Nearly 2 billion euros, money his company had reported holding in Asian bank accounts for years, could not be found. Auditors couldn't verify it existed. Within days, that company would collapse entirely, its stock reduced to a fraction of its former value, its chief executive under arrest, and its chief operating officer vanished without a trace. This is the story of Wirecard, once celebrated as the future of German finance, and the fraud that quietly consumed it for over a decade before anyone was willing to believe it. The rise. Wirecard began in the late 1990s as a small, unremarkable payment processing company based near Munich. In its early years, it handled transactions for online businesses, including gambling and adult content sites that traditional banks were reluctant to touch. It was a niche business, operating in the margins of the financial industry. Everything changed when Markus Braun joined the company. An Austrian-born executive with a background in technology consulting,
Braun became CEO in 2002 and quickly reshaped Wirecard's image. He positioned the company as a cutting-edge fintech firm, one that would modernize digital payments for a world moving away from cash. Braun cultivated a very specific persona. He wore black turtlenecks, spoke about disruption and innovation, and drew comparisons to Steve Jobs. Investors found the image compelling. Under Braun, Wirecard expanded aggressively, buying up smaller payment companies across Asia and the Middle East, particularly in markets with limited regulatory oversight. Central to this expansion was Jan Marsalek, appointed Chief Operating Officer in the mid-2000s. Marsalek was young, ambitious, and deeply involved in the company's most secretive dealings. He built a sprawling network of so-called third-party acquirers, external partner companies that supposedly processed a significant share of Wirecard's payment volume in regions where Wirecard itself held no license to operate. This structure was the engine of the fraud, though almost no one recognized it at the time. Because Wirecard didn't directly process these transactions, it couldn't easily prove they were happening at all. Revenue and profit figures tied to these partners were, for the most part, fabricated. By the mid-2010s, Wirecard's growth looked extraordinary. In 2018, it was inducted into the DAX, Germany's index of the 30 largest publicly traded companies, replacing Commerzbank, one of the country's oldest financial institutions. At its peak, Wirecard was valued at more than 20 billion euros. It was, briefly, worth more than Deutsche Bank. The first warnings. The story of Wirecard's fraud is also a story of warnings that were ignored, buried, or actively suppressed for years. As early as 2008, a group of German shareholders raised concerns about inconsistencies in Wirecard's balance sheet. The company responded by hiring the accounting firm EY to conduct a special audit. EY cleared Wirecard of wrongdoing and was subsequently retained as the company's ongoing auditor, a relationship that would continue for over a decade. Meanwhile, German regulators pursued legal action against the very investors who had raised the initial concerns, accusing them of market manipulation for failing to disclose their short positions. This pattern would repeat itself again and again. Whenever journalists or short sellers raised red flags about Wirecard's accounts, German regulators seemed more interested in investigating the people asking questions than the company itself. In 2015, the Financial Times launched an investigative series called House of Wirecard, examining irregularities in the company's finances across its Asian subsidiaries. The reporting was detailed and persistent, but it struggled to gain traction against Wirecard's growing stock price and its aggressive legal responses to critical coverage. Inside the company, doubts were also surfacing. In March 2018, Wirecard's legal team in Singapore opened an internal investigation after receiving a whistleblower report describing suspicious money flows. According to later accounts, Jan Marsalek moved to shut the investigation down. That same year, Wirecard completed its acquisition of Citigroup's prepaid card business and received another clean audit from EY, sending its stock to record highs. Months later, it entered the DAX. Frustrated that internal concerns were going nowhere, A whistleblower from Wirecard's own legal department reached out to the Financial Times in late 2018, providing internal documents and emails. The paper published its findings in January 2019, presenting what appeared to be credible evidence of accounting fraud within Wirecard's Asian operations. Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, responded not by investigating Wirecard, but by opening an inquiry into the Financial Times itself, examining whether its reporting constituted market manipulation. For a company built almost entirely on the illusion of legitimacy, this outcome was for a while a kind of shield. The Unraveling. By early 2020, the pressure had not gone away. KPMG was brought in to conduct an independent special audit intended to finally settle the years of allegations. When the report was published in April, it fell short of a clean bill of health. KPMG stated it had been unable to verify a significant portion of Wirecard's profits from recent years, particularly those tied to the third-party acquirer business that Marsalek had built. Wirecard insisted the findings were a technicality, a matter of documentation rather than substance. The company promised its regular auditor, EY, would resolve the outstanding questions when it signed off on the 2019 annual report, originally due in April and delayed twice. That resolution never came. On June 18, 2020, EY
refused to certify Wirecard's 2019 accounts. The firm stated it could not confirm the existence of 1.9 billion euros in cash, supposedly held in trust accounts at 2 banks in the Philippines, representing close to a quarter of Wirecard's entire balance sheet. It was on this day that Markus Braun released his now infamous video statement, telling employees and investors that Wirecard might itself be the victim of a large-scale fraud committed against the company rather than by it. The claim did not hold. The Philippine Central Bank quickly stated that the funds in question had never entered the country's banking system at all. The 2 banks named by Wirecard, BDO and BPI, said the documents used to support the claims appeared to be fabricated. Wirecard's stock, which had closed near 104 euros just days earlier, began a freefall. Within a single week, it lost over 80% of its value. On June 19th, Markus Braun resigned as CEO. 3 days later, on June 22nd, Wirecard issued a statement that stripped away any remaining ambiguity. The 1.9 billion euros likely never existed at all. That same day, Braun was arrested by German authorities on suspicion of falsifying the company's financial statements and market manipulation. He was released on bail shortly afterward, but would later be arrested again.
As the investigation deepened, Jan Marsalek was suspended from his role, and within days, an arrest warrant was issued in his name. He was already gone. The disappearance. What happened to Jan Marsalek in the days following his suspension remains, even now, only partially understood. Public records indicate he traveled to Austria before crossing into a country widely believed to be Belarus, evading German authorities just ahead of his arrest warrant. Investigative reporting in the years since has suggested Marsalek may have had long-standing contacts within Russian intelligence circles, and that his escape may have been coordinated with outside help rather than improvised. Some reporting has connected him to individuals allegedly involved in espionage activity across Europe, though the full scope of these connections is still being investigated and litigated in multiple countries. As of the years following his disappearance, Marsalek has never been apprehended. He remains one of Europe's most wanted fugitives, believed by investigators to be living somewhere within Russia, protected from extradition. Meanwhile, in Munich, the company he helped build ceased to exist within days.
On June 25, 2020, Wirecard filed for insolvency. It had racked up debts exceeding 3 billion euros to a syndicate of banks, loans that were suddenly at risk of default. James Fries, a compliance expert who had been hired to help clean up the company, arrived for what was meant to be his first day on the job, only to find himself managing its collapse instead. The fraud, once fully examined, appeared to stretch back years, if not longer. Investigators would later conclude that Wirecard's Asian operations, the very business unit Marsalek had built and defended, had likely been largely fictitious,
propped up by falsified contracts, forged bank statements, and a web of shell companies designed to make imaginary revenue appear real on paper. The reckoning. The fallout extended well beyond Wirecard itself. EY, the firm that had signed off on Wirecard's accounts for over a decade without ever fully verifying the existence of its offshore cash holdings, faced intense scrutiny over how such a significant fraud could go undetected for so long. Shareholders and investors, having lost billions collectively, began pursuing legal claims against the auditor, arguing that basic verification steps had simply never been performed. BaFin, the regulator that had spent years investigating journalists instead of the company they were reporting on, faced its own criticism. A parliamentary inquiry was launched in the German Bundestag in the fall of 2020 to examine how regulatory oversight had failed so completely. Markus Braun was formally charged with fraud, breach of trust, and market manipulation. His trial, one of the largest corporate fraud cases in German history, began years later and has stretched on, with Braun remaining in custody throughout much of the proceedings due to concerns that he might flee the country, much as his former colleague had. Jan Marsalek was never brought before a court.
His name continues to surface periodically in unrelated European espionage investigations, a strange coda to a financial crime that increasingly resembles something out of a spy novel rather than a corporate scandal. At its height, Wirecard was a symbol of German technological ambition, a company trusted enough to sit alongside some of the country's oldest and most established financial institutions. Its collapse remains one of the largest accounting frauds in European history, a case built not on a single dramatic theft, but on years of fabricated numbers that almost no one outside the company had the access or the will to properly question. The trial of Markus Braun continues. The full scale of what happened inside Wirecard's Asian operations may never be completely known. And somewhere, presumed to be far beyond the reach of German law enforcement, Jan Marsalek remains missing. The one man who may understand exactly how the fraud worked and exactly where the money went.